The Saturday carnival was alive with the kind of chaos that made adults nostalgic and kids ecstatic. Brightly colored tents pitched in uneven rows, the aroma of popcorn and cinnamon-dusted apples hanging in the air, and the deafening whir of rides spinning against a backdrop of laughter and music. 8-year-old Lily moved carefully among the crowd, her small frame almost swallowed by the throng. Her left leg was stiff in a white brace, clunky with metal hinges that clicked against the asphalt with every cautious step. She clutched Peanut's leash tightly, her tiny rescue dog waddling beside her, ears perked and eyes alert beneath a red bandana she had insisted on wearing. Peanut's fur shimmered in the afternoon sun, golden against the bright carnival lights. To anyone else, he might have looked ordinary, but to Lily, he was everything. Her companion, her protector, her confidant in a world that often seemed cruel. Lily's parents had always been careful about her adventures in public. She had cerebral palsy, and although her movements were deliberate and cautious, she had developed a fierce independence. Today, however, her mother had insisted that Lily experience the carnival just like every other child, even if it meant holding Peanut extra close and moving slower than most. "Watch the rides from the ground, sweetheart," her mother had said, planting a gentle kiss on her daughter's head. Lily nodded, brushing back her light brown hair and gripping Peanut's leash with determination. She was going to enjoy the day, no matter what. But people rarely allowed Lily to move through a crowd unnoticed. Some stared with pity, others with curiosity, and a few, well, they didn't bother hiding their cruelty. A group of teenagers had spotted Lily just as she approached the ring toss booth, their designer jackets stark against the worn carnival asphalt. They huddled together, laughter spilling out like a contagion. Lily, sensing eyes on her, froze mid-step. One of the boys, tall with a shock of dark hair and a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, nudged his friend and whispered something. Lily caught the words by accident. "Look, the broken girl brought her broken mutt," the boy said loud enough for anyone near to hear. Laughter erupted from the group, harsh and sharp. Lily's face burned, not with anger but with a familiar sting of humiliation. She had grown used to whispers and sideways glances, but this was cruel even by playground standards. Peanut, sensing her distress, yipped softly, circling her legs as if shielding her. Lily knelt to scratch behind his ears, whispering encouragements, her voice trembling. "Don't worry, Peanut, we'll be okay. We always are." The tall boy, whose name Lily would later learn was Chase, stepped forward, his grin widening. "What's wrong, little girl? Don't your legs work properly, or is your dog just slow too?" His words were sharp, intended to slice through her fragile confidence. Peanut growled low, a tiny sound that carried more menace than its size suggested. Lily's stomach twisted. She wanted to shout, to run, to disappear, but the crowd was thick and her movements were slow. She could only clutch Peanut tighter, trying to keep him close. Chase's friends snickered behind him, their designer shoes tapping against the pavement. They were used to getting their way, used to fear bending to their whims. One of them kicked a loose pebble in Lily's direction. It bounced off her shoe, harmless but humiliating. "Watch where you step," she muttered, voice barely audible. Chase laughed. He wasn't satisfied. He reached for her backpack, a colorful bag adorned with cartoon stickers and patches, and yanked it from her shoulders. Lily gasped, scrambling forward, but the strap tangled in her brace. She fell, knees scraping against the rough asphalt. The crowd gasped, some horrified, others unsure how to react. Peanut barked sharply, circling Lily protectively. Chase, enjoying the chaos, bent down and kicked Peanut's small body lightly. The dog yelped and rolled onto the gravel, paws flailing. Lily's chest tightened, tears welled in her eyes, blurring the bright lights of the carnival. Her voice broke as she screamed, "Stop, please." But the teenagers only laughed harder, enjoying the power they wielded over someone smaller, weaker, or so they thought. The air felt electric, charged with cruelty, and Lily felt a wave of helplessness she hadn't experienced in months. Her hands shook as she reached for Peanut, brushing his fur and checking for injuries. It was then that she noticed him. At the edge of the crowd, near a row of food stalls, a man watched. He wasn't part of the carnival. His leather vest and worn jeans marked him immediately as a biker. His arms were crossed, and tattoos snaked along his forearms, visible even beneath the short sleeves of his shirt. He held a cup of coffee loosely in one hand, but his eyes were fixed on Lily and Peanut. There was a tension in his posture, a kind of controlled aggression that suggested he wasn't someone to be trifled with. Lily had never seen him before, yet she felt something almost instinctively safe about his presence, a silent promise that someone noticed. Chase kicked pebbles, laughing cruelly as he did so. Lily's parents, nearby but distracted by a misplaced carnival map, hadn't noticed yet. She tried to stand, wincing as her brace bit into her skin, but Chase stepped closer, ready to mock her next move. The biker shifted, the faint sound of his boots echoing on the asphalt. One of Chase's friends noticed and whispered, "Who's that guy?" Chase waved him off, smirking. But the smirk faltered when the biker's gaze locked on him. It was sharp, unwavering, full of a quiet warning that made Chase hesitate for the first time that day. Lily's knees scraped, her palms stinging from the fall, but she ignored the pain, focused solely on Peanut. The little dog whimpered, leaning into her, trembling. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling his small heartbeat hammer against her chest. The crowd around them started to shift, some sensing that the tension was no longer just between Lily and the teens. The biker took a step closer, his shadow stretching over the circle of mockery. There was a low hum in the air, like a storm about to break, and Lily could feel it in her chest, a mixture of fear and the tiniest flicker of hope. Chase noticed the movement, his laughter faltering. "Who's your friend?" he sneered, gesturing toward the biker. His friends shifted nervously, sensing that the dynamic had changed. The biker didn't answer immediately. He just watched, every muscle in his body poised, every glance calculating. Lily's heart pounded. She had never asked for a hero, had never expected one, but the presence of this stranger, this silent guardian, sparked a glimmer of courage in her. She hugged Peanut tighter, whispering, maybe this time someone will help." And just as Chase opened his mouth, ready to deflect his own fear with another taunt, the biker's hand rested lightly on the grip of a chain attached to his bike. His eyes never left the teenagers. "Leave the dog alone," he said, voice low, controlled, but impossible to ignore. The carnival sounds, the rides, the music, the chatter seemed to fade into the background. Every eye in the small circle turned toward the biker. The teens froze. Lily's stomach tightened, adrenaline surging. Something was about to happen, something big, and she didn't know whether to hope or fear it. Peanut let out a soft, almost thankful bark, nuzzling Lily as if sensing that help had finally arrived. The biker's presence was enough to shift the atmosphere, but Lily couldn't shake the feeling that the next moments would define everything: her day, her courage, and the fate of her small, brave companion. Chase took a step back, but his smirk lingered, uncertain yet defiant. The biker's shadow loomed over the group like an approaching storm. And then, in the split second of silence that followed, Lily realized that this stranger wasn't just watching. He was waiting. Waiting to see if the cruelty around her would end, or if the storm would erupt. The carnival seemed to hold its breath. Lily, her face streaked with tears, hugged Peanut tighter. The biker's eyes never left the group, sharp, calculating, protective. And somewhere deep inside, Lily felt the tiniest flicker of hope, that perhaps this time things would be different, that perhaps someone really did care. And then Chase stepped forward. Chase's foot hovered over the gravel for a moment, hesitation flickering across his sharp features. The biker's eyes, dark and unwavering, held him in place like an invisible chain. Around them, the carnival buzz continued, oblivious to the storm brewing at its edge. Lily crouched over Peanut, her small hand stroking his trembling fur, murmuring, "It's okay, you're safe now." The words sounded fragile even to her own ears, but they were all she could offer against the raw intimidation radiating from Chase and his friends. Chase recovered first, his smirk a little less certain. "Who do you think you are?" he spat toward the biker. "Some wannabe hero in a leather vest." He shifted his weight, trying to regain control, but the biker, known to locals as Rhino, didn't flinch. Instead, he took a measured step forward, and the distance between them seemed to shrink with invisible force. His presence alone sent a ripple of tension through the nearby carnival goers, some of whom had begun whispering, sensing the impending confrontation. Peanut whimpered, pressing against Lily's chest. She swallowed hard, her mind racing for a plan, but her brace slowed her movements. Chase's friends circled, eyes darting between the biker and Lily, unsure whether to intervene or flee. They had never seen someone like this, someone who didn't flinch at wealth, power, or teenage cruelty. Rhino's shadow stretched long over the asphalt, and Lily felt a strange, heavy comfort in it, like being shielded by something larger than fear itself. Chase jabbed his finger toward Lily and her dog. "You're just a weak little girl, you can't even control that mutt." His voice cracked with bravado, but it lacked conviction. The biker's response was a single calm sentence: "Step back or you'll regret it." His voice was low, gravelly, and carried an authority that made even the boldest teen hesitate. Chase's smirk wavered. "Or what?" he challenged, his bravado thin. Rhino's jaw tightened. "Or you'll find out." The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every passerby pause mid-step. A carousel's music cut off abruptly as if the carnival itself were holding its breath. Lily's fingers dug into Peanut's fur, feeling the rapid heartbeat beneath her palm. She wanted to run, wanted to escape, but she knew Peanut couldn't. His small legs were too short, his brace too awkward, and the thought of leaving him behind was unbearable. So she stayed, rooted to the spot, hoping the stranger would act before anything worse happened. Then Chase did something reckless. He stomped toward Peanut, intent on another scare, perhaps emboldened by his friend's laughter. Lily lunged, shouting, "Stop!" Her voice cracked, echoing off the tents. Peanut barked furiously, teeth bared despite his small size. The biker moved faster than Lily could comprehend. In one fluid motion, Rhino stepped between Chase and the dog, hand brushing the chain dangling from his belt, a silent warning of the strength he could wield. Chase skidded to a halt, eyes widening, suddenly aware that his usual power over smaller, weaker beings was meaningless here. A nearby crowd member gasped. "He's not playing around," murmured a teenage girl clutching her cotton candy. Another parent whispered to their child, "Stay back, don't get involved." The tension grew, almost tangible, like static before a storm. Chase's friends started to edge backward, their bravado faltering. The carnival, for all its noise and color, had suddenly become a stage for something far more serious, something dangerous. Lily's chest heaved as she clutched Peanut. She couldn't believe her luck, that someone had stepped in when she felt most powerless. Chase's father, Derek Maxwell, appeared suddenly, storming through the crowd with the precision of a man used to control. "What's going on here?" he barked, his voice cutting through the suspense like a knife. His tailored suit seemed almost comical against the chaotic backdrop of carnival tents and spinning rides. He grabbed Chase by the shoulder, jerking him behind him. "Step away from the child," Maxwell ordered, glaring at the biker. But Rhino didn't move. His stance was unshakable, calm yet dangerous. "Your son hurt a child and her dog," he said simply. Maxwell's face contorted in disbelief. "Allegedly," he countered sharply, a practiced tone of arrogance dripping from every word. Lily froze, her stomach knotted. She had no words, no evidence to defend herself or Peanut beyond the trembling dog pressed against her chest. Her eyes flicked to the biker, silently pleading. Rhino's gaze met hers, and he nodded ever so slightly, a subtle reassurance that help was on its way, even if it wasn't immediate. Maxwell turned his attention back to Lily. "Do you have proof of this?" he demanded, voice rising, tone condescending. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, whispering, speculating, some protective, some curious. Lily swallowed hard. She wanted to speak, but fear and panic tied her tongue. Then came the first spark of hope. A middle-aged woman in the crowd raised her smartphone. "I got it," she shouted. "I recorded everything." Heads turned. Gasps rippled through the bystanders. Chase's smirk faltered for the first time, his father's expression tightened with irritation. The woman played the video, showing in real time Chase's kick, the shove to Peanut, the mocking laughter. The carnival's chaos seemed to freeze. Children on nearby rides stopped, some staring wide-eyed. Vendors paused mid-transaction. The video made the cruelty undeniable. Maxwell's face paled. "It's just a joke," he blurted, but the words were hollow. Rhino stepped closer, unwavering. Lily's chest heaved as she hugged Peanut tighter. She could feel his small body trembling against her, a mix of fear and relief. The biker didn't speak. He simply let the video do the talking, letting Chase and Maxwell see that no one would ignore this. Chase's friends shuffled backward, unease written across their faces. The security personnel had begun to move toward the commotion, drawn by the crowd's whispers and the undeniable tension. The carnival that had moments ago felt like a world of fun and safety had shifted into a stage for accountability, courage, and confrontation. Lily's heart raced, but this time she had someone on her side. Maxwell's attempts to regain control were aggressive but ineffective. "Delete that video," he barked at the woman trying to assert his influence. She shook her head, defiance in her eyes. "No, everyone should see what really happened." Chase, now visibly shaken, glanced at his father, uncertainty clouding his usual arrogance. Rhino's presence was like a magnet, drawing all attention, creating a force field of tension that Maxwell could neither penetrate nor command. He had wealth and status, but here they were meaningless. In this small, chaotic slice of the world, power had shifted to someone else entirely, someone who fought for justice rather than appearances. A small cheer erupted from a nearby cluster of carnival-goers, breaking the tension just slightly. Lily's relief was immediate but fragile. She knew nothing was over yet. Chase's father leaned down, trying to whisper instructions into his son's ear. Rhino, however, leaned forward slightly, his voice low and dangerous. "Your father can't protect you from your actions." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Chase's bravado crumbled. He stumbled back, the reality of consequence settling over him like a heavy fog. The crowd leaned in, sensing a story unfolding that was bigger than a simple playground scuffle. Lily looked at Peanut, who was now beginning to regain some composure. The little dog pressed into her chest, eyes wide, ears flicking. She whispered softly, "See, maybe things are going to be okay." But even as she said it, the fear lingered. What if her small hero, the biker who had intervened, couldn't hold the storm back? What if Chase's father found some way to twist this moment to his advantage? She hugged Peanut tighter, feeling the warmth of his small body, the heartbeat under her hands, and for the first time that day, allowed herself a flicker of hope. And then the moment of suspense reached its peak. Chase, realizing that the confrontation was not ending on his terms, made a sudden move, lunging toward Lily and Peanut, shouting something incoherent in a mix of anger and panic. The crowd gasped. Rhino's hand shot out in a blur, gripping Chase by the shoulder and spinning him away from Lily with a controlled strength that left no room for resistance. Time seemed to stretch, the noise of the carnival fading into a tense silence. Every eye was on them. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the next, and Lily, trembling yet resolute, whispered to Peanut, "It's okay, it's finally okay." Sudden movement froze the carnival in a suspended heartbeat. Chase's body jerked under Rhino's firm grip, his panic-stricken eyes darting from the biker to the small figure of Lily cradling Peanut. Lily's hands trembled around the leash, knuckles white, as adrenaline coursed through her veins. She had never seen someone move with such precision, such controlled force, and it terrified and comforted her all at once. Peanut whimpered softly, leaning into her chest as if sensing the protective wall that now stood between them and the group of teenagers who had caused so much harm. Rhino's gaze never left Chase. Every muscle in his body was coiled, ready for any sudden movement. "Step back," he growled, his voice deep and steady, the kind of voice that carried authority without needing to raise it. Chase's father, Derek Maxwell, fumed next to him, towering in his tailored suit but suddenly powerless in the face of someone who refused to be intimidated. "Get your hands off my son," Maxwell barked, but his words rang hollow. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, tension spiraling with each second. Parents clutched their children, some stepping back, some leaning forward to catch a glimpse of the unfolding drama. Chase struggled, trying to free himself from Rhino's grip. "He's just a kid," he shouted, his voice cracking as desperation replaced arrogance. Rhino tightened his hold slightly, not harshly, but with undeniable control. "Your son kicked a dog. That makes him a bully. That makes him accountable," he said, each word deliberate, heavy with warning. Chase's friends edged toward the sidelines, unsure whether to intervene or escape the gathering storm. Their bravado had vanished in the presence of someone who didn't negotiate with cruelty. The small circle of tension around Lily and Peanut grew taut, as though the air itself had thickened in anticipation. Lily's heart pounded. She could feel Peanut's tiny body trembling in her arms. "It's okay, Peanut, it's okay," she whispered, though her own voice wavered with fear and excitement. For the first time that day, she wasn't alone. Someone else had stepped into the fight she had been too small to wage herself. Her eyes darted between Chase and Rhino, trying to read the next move. She had learned over the years that fear could freeze you, but courage, sometimes it could come in unexpected forms. And Rhino was courage made flesh, towering and formidable, yet careful not to harm. Maxwell stepped closer to his son, a protective wall between Chase and the consequences he was finally facing. "He's out of control," Maxwell snapped, eyes flashing. Rhino didn't back down. "Out of control," he said, voice low, almost a growl. "Your son attacked a child's dog. He's out of control if he thinks that's acceptable." The words hung in the air like smoke, invisible but suffocating. Chase's jaw tightened, anger and fear warring inside him. He had spent years relying on money, status, and intimidation to shield him from accountability, and none of it worked here. None of it mattered. Lily took a small, shaky step forward, holding Peanut tighter. She wanted to speak, to tell everyone that her little dog had been hurt, that she had been humiliated, that she deserved justice. But fear knotted her throat and words failed her. Instead, she hugged Peanut closer, feeling the warmth of his small body, the rapid pulse of life still beating against her chest. She whispered a quiet plea, more for herself than anyone else. "Please let him be okay." The crowd watched, riveted, as the tension escalated. Nearby, a vendor paused mid-sale, spilling popcorn onto the ground. Parents shifted anxiously, unsure whether to intervene or remain spectators. Teenagers whispered among themselves, some shuffling away, sensing that this was no longer a simple altercation. It had become a public reckoning. And then, amid the mounting chaos, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the murmurs. "Someone call an ambulance, no, a vet." A local woman had recognized the seriousness of the situation. She pushed her way toward Lily, phone in hand, already dialing emergency services. "The dog's injured," she shouted. Peanut yipped weakly, ears flattened as Lily's panic intensified. She had feared this moment, the realization that her loyal companion might be seriously hurt. Rhino's eyes softened, though only slightly, as he knelt beside Lily, one massive hand resting gently on her shoulder. "He's tough," Rhino said quietly. "We'll get him help. You don't have to carry this alone." Chase's father exploded. "This is ridiculous. My son is being harassed by a criminal," he yelled, pointing at Rhino. But the biker didn't flinch. His gaze was unwavering, fixed on the teens, the injured dog, the girl who had done nothing wrong but exist in a world that often punished the vulnerable. Maxwell's words fell flat in the presence of undeniable truth, amplified by the murmured agreement of the surrounding crowd. Chase, desperate to reclaim some semblance of control, tried to push Rhino back, but the biker's stance was immovable, his grip firm and unyielding. "Let go of him," Chase barked at Peanut as if the small dog had caused the problem. "It's not your fault," Rhino snapped, his patience snapping thin like a taut wire. "You hurt him, you own this." Chase's bravado crumbled completely, replaced by a tense, panicked silence. For the first time, the consequences of his actions were impossible to ignore. Rhino helped Lily rise slightly, making sure Peanut was secure in her arms. "You did nothing wrong," he assured her. She blinked through tears, nodding, and whispered, I just want him to be okay." Rhino's expression softened slightly. "And he will be," he promised. "We're getting him help now." The woman with the phone had finished the call. "They're sending a vet now," she said, a hint of relief breaking through her worry. Lily exhaled shakily, clinging to Peanut. The little dog twitched weakly, ears flicking as if trying to acknowledge the hope in the air. But Lily could feel his weakness, his fragility, and her stomach twisted. She had faced bullies before, but seeing Peanut injured, the one creature who had never abandoned her, felt like the world had tilted, and she wasn't sure if she could hold it upright. Maxwell, red-faced and sputtering, tried to assert control again. "I demand you release my son," he shouted. Security guards began to approach, unsure of which side to intervene on. Rhino didn't flinch. "Your son is responsible for his actions," Rhino said calmly, his voice like steel. "You don't get to rewrite reality with money and threats." The words landed with crushing weight. Chase's friends shuffled, unsure whether to side with him or escape the situation entirely. Maxwell's aura of authority had fractured, leaving only panic and outrage in its wake. Lily's heart pounded in her chest. Peanut whimpered softly, and she pressed her face into his fur. She could feel the warmth leaving his tiny body with every second, and the fear clawed at her like a wild animal. But Rhino remained a steadfast presence, a wall between her and the cruelty she had endured. And in that moment, Lily realized she was not alone. She had someone who believed in justice, someone who would not allow the weak to be trampled. The distant whirring of an ambulance-style van approached. Lights flashed in the distance, reflecting off the asphalt in streaks of red and blue. The crowd shifted again, murmuring excitedly. Lily's stomach knotted with a mixture of relief and anxiety. She wanted to run to Peanut to hold him close, but she also feared what the vet might find. Rhino placed a steadying hand on her back. "We're almost there," he said. "You're doing great." Chase, realizing that his father could no longer protect him, and that the consequences of his cruelty were unavoidable, slumped, muttering under his breath. His friends quietly drifted away, leaving only the core group: Lily, Peanut, Rhino, Maxwell, and Chase. Maxwell's face was a mask of fury, but his authority had eroded in front of a growing crowd who now whispered about the biker who had stood up for a child. The carnival, once a place of light-hearted fun, had become a crucible, exposing character, courage, and accountability. Lily felt Peanut's tiny heartbeat against her chest, fragile but steady. Her breathing was rapid, her fingers gripping his leash as though by holding tight she could keep the world from collapsing further. Rhino's steady presence at her side felt almost protective, like a shield, and she dared to hope. Chase's glare lingered, but it was now tempered by fear and uncertainty. Maxwell's authority was crumbling, and somewhere in the crowd someone whispered, "This is going to end badly for them." The van arrived, skidding slightly on the asphalt, and volunteers rushed forward. They gently took Peanut from Lily's arms, cradling him on a small stretcher, murmuring reassurances. Lily's tears fell freely as she watched him being carefully lifted into the van. Rhino stayed beside her, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "He's going to be okay," he said again, though even he could feel the tension lingering, unresolved. Chase's father, finally realizing he could no longer control events, muttered something under his breath and retreated, leaving Chase to face the consequences of his actions. Lily reached out a trembling hand to touch Peanut once more before he was carried away. The little dog twitched in response, small, fragile, but alive. And as the van disappeared into the distance, the carnival's chaos slowly returned, though whispers of what had transpired hung heavy in the air. Lily stood, still trembling, still fearful, but a seed of courage had been planted. And behind her, Rhino's watchful eyes never wavered, a silent promise that she and Peanut were not alone. The ambulance-style van disappeared around the corner, carrying Peanut away, and the carnival seemed to exhale as if a weight had been lifted. But the tension didn't vanish, far from it. Lily stood frozen, leaning against Rhino, still trembling from the adrenaline, still clutching the empty leash as though it could tether her to some sense of security. Her heart raced, every fiber of her being screamed worry. Peanut was small, fragile, injured, and she felt powerless. Her parents, finally catching up, rushed to her side, faces etched with concern and guilt. "We didn't see it happen," her mother murmured, kneeling beside her. "We should have." Rhino placed a hand firmly on her shoulder, a silent anchor in the chaos. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "They can't hurt you anymore." Lily swallowed hard, nodding, though fear still gripped her chest. Chase lingered nearby, jaw tight, eyes darting between his father, the disappearing van, and the biker who had disrupted the balance of his world. Derek Maxwell's tailored suit couldn't mask the fury and helplessness etched into his face. He had spent a lifetime manipulating consequences, but here, in this moment, the law of wealth and intimidation had failed him. Maxwell's gaze locked on Rhino. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he said, voice sharp, attempting authority. "This is my son, and you," he gestured at the biker, "are interfering in family matters." Rhino didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head, a shadow of a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Family matters," he said slowly. "When your son harms a defenseless animal and a child, that stops being private. That's public. That's accountability. Something you clearly don't understand." Maxwell's face twisted with rage, but the crowd had shifted. Eyes now scrutinized him, questioning his power, his morality, his ability to control his own child. Chase's friends whispered nervously, circling at a distance, hesitant to intervene. The fear they had once wielded like armor now threatened to consume them. One of them muttered, "Maybe we should go," but Chase silenced him with a glare. "No," Chase hissed. "We can't back down now, not in front of everyone." He shifted, trying to reclaim the dominance he had so effortlessly wielded before, but the presence of Rhino, the gathering crowd, and the unseen eyes of Peanut in the van had turned the tide. For the first time, Chase was outmatched, unshielded by wealth or privilege. Rhino crouched slightly, ensuring Lily's view of Peanut's van remained unobstructed. He didn't need to speak. His calm presence alone was enough to keep her centered, to prevent her fear from overwhelming her. "He's strong," Rhino said softly, as though reading her mind. "He'll make it." Lily nodded, still trembling, tears brimming in her eyes. Her hands flexed around the leash. It was empty now, but it symbolized the connection she and Peanut had, unbroken even across distance, even across fear. Meanwhile, Maxwell had begun packing, muttering under his breath, clearly strategizing how to regain control. "We can't let this escalate," he said, voice low, more to himself than anyone else. Chase stood rigid beside him, tension radiating in every line of his body. The teen's laughter had vanished, replaced by unease. Maxwell's attempts to shield his son were futile against the truth captured on video, witnessed by dozens, and now carried by a biker who refused to be intimidated. Maxwell's power, the power he thought absolute, was cracking in real time. Lily's father finally approached, voice tight with frustration and concern. "Rhino, thank you," he said quietly, shaking the biker's hand. "You didn't have to step in, but you did." Rhino shrugged lightly, his eyes scanning the area as if anticipating another threat. "Someone had to," he said, voice calm but firm. "This isn't right. Kids shouldn't be bullied and animals shouldn't be hurt." Lily glanced up, seeing the gratitude in her father's eyes, the relief in her mother. It was fleeting, though, because she still worried about Peanut, still feared what the vet would find. Maxwell's glare shifted toward Lily, his face a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "And you," he said, addressing her now. "Why involve strangers? Why escalate this?" Lily opened her mouth to speak, but her voice faltered. She swallowed, tears streaking her cheeks. "Because he was hurting Peanut," she whispered finally, voice trembling but clear. The words hung in the air. The crowd hushed, the weight of the moment settling like dust on their shoulders. In that instant, the balance of morality and courage was laid bare. A small girl had stood for what was right, and a man had stood with her. Chase scoffed, attempting defiance. "It's just a dog," he muttered, though it lacked conviction. The crowd hissed in disapproval, and even his father's expression faltered. Rhino leaned slightly closer to Lily, as if shielding her from both Chase and Maxwell. "It's not just anything," Rhino said quietly. "It's life, and it matters." Lily's chest tightened. His words resonated deeply, echoing her own values, her bond with Peanut, and the world she longed to believe could be fair, even if only sometimes. A sudden commotion broke the moment. A young woman from the carnival's volunteer team ran forward, waving her arms. "The veterinary team is here. They're bringing him in." Her voice cut through the tension like a blade, and the crowd parted automatically, creating a corridor for the team to rush forward. Lily's heart leaped. Peanut was coming back, alive and with help. She clutched Rhino's arm instinctively, barely able to contain the mix of fear and relief swirling through her. Every step the vet team took seemed to stretch time. each second loaded with the possibility of joy or tragedy. Chase's eyes widened as the vet team approached, cradling a small stretcher. He stumbled backward, unsure how to react. His friends murmured, some shifting awkwardly, sensing that the reckoning had reached a turning point. Maxwell's fury surged anew, but his commands fell flat against the sheer force of accountability. The crowd had seen the video. The crowd had witnessed the courage. And the crowd was no longer deferential to wealth or status. Maxwell's authority was crumbling in front of everyone, and he knew it. The veterinary volunteers gently lifted Peanut, checking his vital signs with quiet precision. Lily's knees buckled slightly, relief battling fear as she reached forward, desperate to touch him. "He's strong," one volunteer said softly. "He's stabilizing." Tears streamed down Lily's cheeks. She whispered, thank you," barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. Rhino knelt beside her, hand steadying her shoulder. "He's going to be okay," he assured her again, though the weight of uncertainty lingered in the air. Chase and his father had been pushed to the margins, the balance of power shifting irrevocably. Maxwell's face was red with fury and disbelief. This is absurd," he shouted, pointing toward the volunteers and the biker. "You can't just take my son's word," but the crowd hushed him, eyes filled with judgment. Murmurs of approval for Rhino, Lily, and the veterinary team spread like wildfire. Children stared wide-eyed. Parents whispered. Even Chase's friends exchanged uneasy glances. Maxwell's attempts to manipulate reality had been undone by courage, compassion, and undeniable evidence. He realized painfully that wealth could not shield his son from truth. Lily took a deep breath, clutching the empty leash. She had been powerless moments ago, but now she felt a flicker of control, a sense that just a small, fragile human was possible. She whispered softly to Peanut as if he could hear her through the distance, "Hang on, just hang on." The crowd watched silently, sensing the emotional weight of the moment. Rhino's shadow still loomed protectively, a reminder that courage could manifest in many forms: a biker, a volunteer, a child who refused to be silent. And then, just as the veterinary team began to move toward the van, something happened that froze every eye. Peanut's tiny paw twitched. The crowd gasped. Lily gasped. Rhino's eyes narrowed, focusing entirely on the small, fragile creature. Chase's jaw dropped, disbelief replacing arrogance. Maxwell's face paled, a rare crack in his unyielding facade. Peanut's paw moved again, a tiny, fragile sign of life and hope. The world seemed to hold its breath. Lily pressed her face against her hands, unable to speak, barely able to believe it. The smallest life she had ever cherished had fought back. For a moment the carnival noise faded into nothingness. The only sound was the rapid, hopeful beating of Lily's heart and the faint whimper from Peanut, still fragile, still small, but alive. The storm that had begun with cruelty, arrogance, and fear now held a glimmer of redemption, fragile yet undeniable. And as the veterinary team prepared to transport Peanut safely, the tension lingered unresolved. Would he fully recover? Would justice be served? And what would become of Chase and his father in the aftermath? The veterinary van's doors closed with a metallic clang, sealing Peanut inside. Lily pressed her face to the glass, watching the little dog's tiny, trembling form. Her heart pounded so violently it echoed in her ears, matching the rapid beat of his weak paw against the stretcher. She had never felt more powerless, yet she had never felt more grateful for Rhino, whose steady presence anchored her through the chaos. He didn't speak much, his eyes said enough, but his hand on her shoulder reassured her. She was not alone in this fight. Chase slumped against his father, the adrenaline that had fueled his cruelty now drained and replaced with something far more vulnerable: fear. He watched the van pull away, the weight of accountability settling like a boulder on his chest. Maxwell's tailored suit was disheveled, his hands trembled slightly, and his usual aura of control was fractured. The evidence, video footage, eyewitnesses, and now the van carrying Peanut, had stripped him of the illusion that wealth and influence could shield his son from consequences. Chase's eyes darted toward Rhino, whose calm, towering presence still radiated authority. "You'll regret this," Maxwell muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else but loud enough for the crowd to hear. Rhino's gaze remained steady, unwavering. "Regret comes from ignoring accountability," he said quietly, almost conversationally. "Your son attacked a child and her dog. There's no escape from that." Chase's friends whispered nervously, glancing at the disappearing van, their confidence evaporating like morning mist. The carnival, once a place of frivolity and noise, now hummed with tension. The anticipation of consequences, the thrill of justice in motion, and the uncertainty of what would happen next. Lily's mother wrapped her arms around her daughter, holding her close, though her own hands shook with worry. "It's going to be okay, sweetie," she murmured, voice tight with emotion. "They're going to help him." Lily nodded, pressing her forehead against her mother's chest, feeling the warmth of her embrace. But even in the comfort of her parents' arms, the fear lingered. Peanut's fragile frame, the knowledge of his suffering, and the memory of Chase's cruelty all weighed heavily on her. She wanted to cry, scream, or run, but instead she clung to the hope that the vet would stabilize him. The biker Rhino crouched beside Lily, his expression softened slightly. "He's a fighter," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Don't give up on him yet." Lily glanced up, meeting his gaze, and for the first time that day she allowed herself a glimmer of belief. The world, despite its cruelty, had shown her that courage existed in many forms. A stranger who would stand for what was right, volunteers who risked chaos to save a life, and even the tiny, fragile heartbeat of Peanut himself. Chase's father, Derek Maxwell, was packing now, muttering to himself. "We can't let this escalate," he said sharply, though his voice lacked conviction. "We can't allow him to ruin everything." Chase glanced up, uncertainty flickering across his face. He had relied on his father's control for years, manipulating peers, bending rules, and relying on wealth as a shield. But here, all of it had failed. Maxwell's attempts to manipulate reality had been rendered powerless in front of evidence, witnesses, and the undeniable courage of someone outside their sphere. A crowd of bystanders began whispering among themselves, admiration and curiosity mixing in equal parts. Many were parents, watching children who had been fearless or cruel, understanding that the small acts of courage, like that of Rhino, like that of Lily, could ripple outward in ways no one expected. One older man muttered, "Never underestimate someone who steps up when others won't." Another parent added, "Or the kids who refuse to be silent." Lily, still holding her mother's hand, felt a flicker of pride. Even though she was small, even though Peanut was injured, she had sparked something bigger than herself, a confrontation with justice and morality that couldn't be ignored. Meanwhile, Chase, flustered and cornered, tried to regain some sense of control. "It's just a dog," he barked, voice quivering under the weight of scrutiny. The crowd murmured their disapproval. Rhino leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing. "It's not just a dog," he said, voice low and dangerous. "It's a life, and actions have consequences." Chase faltered, realizing the truth in those words. For the first time he understood that cruelty, arrogance, and privilege could not erase wrongdoing. The crowd's gaze was no longer on Lily. They were on Chase, weighing his actions against the standard of decency. The sound of the veterinary van's engine was distant but growing louder as it returned from its brief stop. The volunteers' careful movements ensured that Peanut's fragile body was supported, every shift deliberate and cautious. Lily's chest tightened. She wanted to run toward the van, to scoop Peanut into her arms to shield him from fear or pain, but she stayed put, anchored by Rhino's presence, feeling that sometimes the right course was patience, not rash action. The little dog's paw twitched again, weak but determined, a sign that life and hope still lingered. Maxwell's face darkened as he watched the unfolding scene. "This is ridiculous," he hissed, glancing around at the growing crowd. His usual tactics of intimidation were ineffective, powerless against the truth captured on video and witnessed firsthand. Chase's friends avoided eye contact, aware that the tide had shifted. Maxwell's authority was collapsing, a fragile veneer of power stripped away by courage, evidence, and morality. Even in his fury, he could sense that the story was no longer about controlling his son. It was about reckoning with the consequences of choices he could no longer manipulate. Lily pressed her face to Rhino's arm, drawing strength from his calm demeanor. "Will he be okay?" she whispered, voice trembling. Rhino's hand rested lightly on her shoulder. "He's going to fight," he said quietly, his tone steady and reassuring. "We'll get him through this." Lily exhaled shakily, tears sliding down her cheeks. The fear remained, but it was tempered by hope, fragile, yes, but tangible. She clung to the thought that even in the face of cruelty, life had a way of fighting back, and courage could be found in the most unexpected places. The crowd shifted again, creating a corridor for the van as it approached. The veterinary team carefully carried Peanut inside, their movements deliberate, almost reverent. Lily's stomach knotted, her eyes wide with worry. She wanted to be with him, to shield him from pain, but she also understood the necessity of letting trained professionals handle the situation. Rhino stayed by her side, ensuring no one crowded too close, that no further harm could come. Chase and his father were pushed to the sidelines, powerless, observed by the eyes of dozens who now understood the stakes. And then the moment came, a tiny, miraculous twitch from Peanut's paw. The crowd gasped. Lily pressed her face to her hands, heart leaping with relief and fear. Rhino's eyes narrowed, focused entirely on the van, his protective instinct unwavering. Chase's jaw dropped, disbelief etched into every line of his face. Maxwell's face paled, the fragility of his authority made undeniable. The little dog, fragile and trembling, had fought back. The tiniest heartbeat, the smallest flicker of life, carried more weight than wealth, arrogance, or cruelty ever could. Lily's breath caught in her throat. "He's alive," she whispered, voice barely audible. Rhino nodded slightly, eyes still scanning for threats, still standing sentinel over her, over Peanut, over the moment of fragile triumph. The van disappeared around the corner once more, racing toward the veterinary clinic, lights flashing, urgency carrying hope. The carnival's noise slowly returned, though whispers of the heroic intervention, the injustice confronted, and the dog's precarious survival lingered in the air. Chase's friends shuffled away, leaving only the fractured group: Lily, her parents, Rhino, and the Maxwells. The confrontation had transformed from cruelty to accountability, from fear to courage, from chaos to an undeniable moral reckoning. The crowd dispersed slowly, talking among themselves about the courage they had witnessed, the bravery of a small girl and a vigilant stranger, and the fragility of power when confronted with truth. Lily pressed her hands together, whispering to Peanut through the van's small window, "Fight, okay? I'm waiting." The flicker of life, the fragile paw twitch, was a promise. And even as fear and uncertainty lingered, hope had been reborn, tenuous, fragile, but real. Chase's father realized too late that control could not shield his son, that power could not erase wrongdoing, and that the smallest acts of courage, embodied in a little girl and her tiny dog, could spark consequences no one could ignore. The veterinary clinic's fluorescent lights were harsh, sterile, and unforgiving. Lily sat in the waiting room, Peanut's empty carrier on her lap, trembling as though holding the space where he should be could somehow keep him alive. Her parents flanked her, silent but tense, their hands gripping hers in quiet solidarity. Rhino leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a sentinel of calm and control. Outside, the city's evening traffic hummed indifferently, but inside the clinic, time had slowed to a heartbeat, each second stretching endlessly with anticipation. Lily could barely remember how they had arrived. One moment, Peanut was trembling in her arms after Chase's cruel kick, and the next, a team of volunteers had whisked him into the van. She replayed every detail, every kick, every gasp of horror, every act of courage, over and over in her mind. Chase's sneer, his friends' laughter, and the sheer helplessness she had felt made her stomach churn. But alongside it, Rhino's presence, calm and unwavering, had given her a thread of hope she clung to desperately. "Is he going to be okay?" Lily whispered again, her voice cracking under the weight of anxiety. Her mother stroked her hair softly. "The vet said he's strong," she replied, trying to sound confident. "He's in the best hands." But even her mother's voice wavered, betraying her own fear. Lily pressed her face to Peanut's carrier, willing him to fight, willing him to survive. Her small body shivered, adrenaline replaced by fear, hope fighting with panic. She had never been so aware of life's fragility, and the thought that cruelty could so easily harm the one she loved made her stomach twist in knots. Rhino's voice cut through the anxious silence. "They'll stabilize him," he said quietly. "They know what they're doing. You did everything right, everything anyone could do. Now we wait." Lily glanced up at him, her eyes wide, searching for reassurance. His gaze was steady, unshakable, and she felt some of her fear ease under the weight of his calm presence. Yet the uncertainty lingered like a shadow. She could not see Peanut, could not touch him, and every second felt like a lifetime. Meanwhile, Chase and his father were a few blocks away, in the dimly lit lobby of an upscale hotel, packing like predators caught in unfamiliar territory. Chase's face was pale, his arrogance replaced with guilt and fear. "I didn't mean to hurt him that badly," he muttered, though even he knew the words were hollow. Maxwell's hands shook, his tailored suit now crumpled, a symbol of authority under siege. "Don't underestimate the consequences," Maxwell hissed. "We'll figure a way to spin this. Just don't make it worse." But both of them knew, deep down, that the social storm they had unleashed could not be controlled. The video, the witnesses, the van, nothing could be erased. Back at the clinic, a nurse appeared at the glass doors. Lily's heart leapt. She stood abruptly, clutching the empty leash like a lifeline. The nurse approached slowly, professional but empathetic. "The dog is stable for now," she said. "He's responding to treatment, but he's been injured badly. You need to be prepared for ups and downs." Lily exhaled shakily, tears streaming. "Can I see him?" she asked, voice barely audible. The nurse nodded. "Follow me and try to stay calm. He needs your support, but your fear can make it harder for him." Rhino led the way, his massive frame navigating the narrow corridor with quiet authority. Lily followed, each step weighted with dread and anticipation. When the door opened, Peanut lay on a small examination table, tubes and monitors surrounding his fragile body. His eyes flickered weakly at her approach, ears twitching. Lily's chest tightened. She knelt beside him, pressing her face to his soft fur. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not leaving, I promise." Peanut whimpered softly, a fragile acknowledgement that he recognized her presence, that her love mattered even in the midst of pain. The veterinary team worked with meticulous care, adjusting monitors, administering IV fluids, and speaking to one another in hushed tones. Lily could only watch, powerless but desperate to help in any way she could. Her hands shook as she stroked Peanut gently, murmuring words of encouragement. Rhino remained close, scanning the room with alert, calculating eyes. Even in this sterile, quiet environment, danger and unpredictability seemed present, though now the danger was life itself, not human cruelty. Hours passed. Lily's small frame began to sag with exhaustion. She had barely eaten, barely moved, barely breathed outside of short, sharp gasps of worry. Her parents encouraged her to rest, to step away, but she refused. Every second away from Peanut felt like a betrayal, every heartbeat without him a risk. Rhino never left her side, a calm pillar of strength she could cling to in the storm of her fear. The nurse came and went, delivering updates that alternated between hope and caution, but Lily could barely focus on anything beyond the fragile life before her. Outside, social media had exploded. Someone in the crowd had captured part of the confrontation on video, and clips of Chase's cruelty, Rhino's intervention, and Lily's bravery were going viral. People across the city and beyond watched the story unfold in real time, opinions forming, outrage building, and a groundswell of support for the little girl and her dog. Chase's father received phone calls, messages, and emails questioning his parenting, his ethics, and his morality. The consequences were growing far beyond the carnival, far beyond the local neighborhood. Inside the clinic, the tension reached a new level. Peanut's vital signs spiked and dipped erratically, causing Lily's heart to leap and sink with every monitor beep. "He's struggling," one of the vets said quietly. "We're doing everything we can." Lily's hands clenched, nails digging into the table's edge. "Please, please don't let him die," she whispered. Her voice was raw with desperation, unfiltered emotion spilling out in a way only pure love can produce. Rhino placed a steadying hand on her back. "He's a fighter," he said again, low and firm. "You're giving him strength just by being here." Chase's face flashed across a social media feed on someone's phone, a visual of humiliation and guilt magnified by the internet. The comments were merciless. "He's a coward," one read. "His father is failing him," said another. The viral storm made it impossible to spin the situation, impossible to hide behind wealth or privilege. Chase's once mighty aura of control had crumbled completely, leaving only fear and the realization that he was fully accountable for his actions. Hours blurred into an uneasy night. Lily remained kneeling beside Peanut, murmuring reassurances, stroking his fur and watching the monitors like a hawk. Every beep, every twitch, every shallow breath was magnified in her mind. The fear was all-consuming, yet beneath it, a fragile glimmer of hope persisted. Peanut had survived the initial trauma. That small fact, fragile and tentative, was enough to keep her anchored. Rhino's presence was constant, silent but protective, as if he were a living shield standing between her and a world that had so often felt cruel. Then, just as exhaustion began to overtake her, a small miracle occurred. Peanut's tail gave a weak, tentative wag. The tiny movement was almost imperceptible, yet it sent a wave of relief crashing over Lily. She cried openly, pressing her forehead to his fragile body. You're okay," she whispered, sobbing. Rhino placed a firm hand on her shoulder, his own relief quiet but undeniable. The veterinarians nodded at each other, some smiles breaking through their professional masks. Peanut was fighting. He was fragile but alive, and that small flicker of life became a beacon in the dark night. But as relief washed over the room, a shadow of unease remained. Lily knew the battle wasn't over. Peanut's injuries were serious, and the road to recovery would be long. Chase and his father were still out there, still capable of scheming and intimidation. And the viral storm outside continued to grow, threatening to bring unforeseen attention, judgment, and conflict into their lives. The fragile equilibrium of hope, fear, and justice hung in the air, unresolved, leaving everyone, Lily, Rhino, the Maxwells, and even the veterinary staff, on the precipice of what would come next. Lily pressed her hands together, murmuring softly to Peanut, "Fight, just keep fighting, I'm right here, I won't leave you." The little dog's eyes fluttered, weak but alive, and a faint, trembling whimper escaped his throat. Rhino remained close, vigilant, scanning the room and the world beyond the clinic walls. Outside, the city continued, unaware of the tiny, powerful drama unfolding inside. And inside, the fragile heartbeat of a small dog, the bravery of a little girl, and the unwavering presence of a stranger who refused to let injustice prevail, converged in a moment of fragile hope. Until a knock at the clinic door jolted the room, startling Lily. Everyone froze. Who or what could be arriving at this hour? The air thickened again with suspense, the fragile relief of Peanut's stabilization hanging by a thread. Lily's breath caught. Rhino's hand moved instinctively toward his jacket pocket, eyes narrowing. The knock came again, deliberate, firm, and insistent. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to amplify, every second stretching with tension. The knock reverberated through the clinic, sharp and insistent, like a warning bell slicing through the fragile calm. Lily's small body stiffened, her fingers tightening around the empty leash that still carried the memory of Peanut's small, trembling weight. Rhino's hand moved instinctively to his jacket, his eyes narrowing, scanning the hallway beyond the clinic doors. Every instinct screamed that this was no ordinary visitor. Even in the sterile, fluorescent-lit calm of the clinic, tension coiled like a predator ready to strike. The nurse hesitated at the door, her professional composure warring with curiosity. "Someone's here to see the dog," she said cautiously, glancing at the security camera above the entrance. Lily's pulse quickened. Could it be Chase or his father, or someone else entirely? The weight of uncertainty pressed down, suffocating in its intensity. Every scenario flashed through her mind, each more terrifying than the last. She pressed a trembling hand to Peanut's carrier, as if holding him closer could shield him from the unknown. Rhino stepped forward, his massive frame a wall of authority and protection. "I'll handle this," he said quietly, voice low, carrying both warning and assurance. Lily felt a flicker of relief, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. Whatever or whoever was behind that door, it was clear that courage alone might not be enough to keep them safe. The clinic's atmosphere shifted, tension pooling in the sterile air as the knock came again, more deliberate, more urgent. The door opened slowly, creaking on its hinges. A tall man in a dark hoodie stepped inside, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the room. His face was partially obscured, but his intent was clear. He was not here by accident. The clinic staff tensed. Lily's mother instinctively stepped in front of her daughter, protective, though small, against the sudden threat. Rhino's eyes narrowed, his stance widening, a silent message that any misstep would be met with immediate resistance. The man's gaze settled on Peanut's carrier. "I need to see him," he said, voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. Lily's heart leaped into her throat. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice small but sharp. The man didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured toward Rhino, who had subtly positioned himself between the intruder and the little girl. "I just want the dog," the man said. "It's important." Every fiber of Lily's being screamed that he was dangerous, but the veneer of calm in his voice made the threat all the more unsettling. Rhino's deep, steady voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Not happening," he said. "This dog is under medical care. You don't get to take him." The intruder's eyes flicked toward the biker, assessing, calculating. "I just need him for a short time," he said, tone even but insistent. The crowd of staff, parents, and Lily froze, caught in the gravity of the confrontation. Rhino's jaw tightened. "You're not taking him. End of discussion." His authority was palpable, but the man's calm persistence hinted at hidden leverage or knowledge. Lily's chest tightened. She pressed her forehead to Peanut's carrier, whispering softly, "It's okay, I'm here, don't worry." The small whimper that escaped the dog's throat was enough to heighten the tension. Lily's mind raced with possibilities. Who was this stranger? Why did he care about Peanut? And what could he possibly want with a fragile, injured little dog? The uncertainty was worse than any outright threat. It gnawed at her courage, feeding fear into every heartbeat. The man stepped closer and Rhino's body stiffened, a predator ready to strike. "I don't want trouble," the man said carefully, hands raised slightly in mock surrender. "I just need to check something." Rhino's eyes narrowed further. "You'll leave this room now, you don't touch him." Lily's mother's hand trembled on her daughter's shoulder. He looks serious," she whispered, voice quivering. Rhino's expression didn't change, but his stance radiated the promise of force if the man overstepped. Suddenly, the man pulled back his hood slightly, revealing a familiar face. One of Chase's older acquaintances, a teenager who had been on the fringes of the carnival confrontation. Lily's stomach sank. He was smirking, almost enjoying the tension he had created. "I just want a closer look," he said, as if Peanut's fragile body were a prize or a secret he alone deserved to see. The words made Lily's chest tighten painfully. She pressed against Rhino instinctively, protective instinct flaring. The room seemed to shrink around her, every breath sharp with fear and anticipation. Rhino stepped forward, blocking the path between the intruder and the carrier. "You're not touching him," he said, voice calm but lethal. The man's smirk faltered slightly, realizing the biker was immovable like a mountain against his intent. The tension crackled like electricity. Lily's fingers dug into the carrier, whispering words of encouragement to Peanut, whose tiny body twitched faintly but noticeably in response. Courage, it seemed, was contagious. The intruder's smirk faded entirely. "Fine," he said finally, taking a step back. "But this isn't over." The words hung in the air, a threat, a promise, and a challenge rolled into one. He turned and left as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving a silence that pressed down on everyone like a physical weight. Rhino's shoulders relaxed just slightly, but his vigilance remained intact. Lily exhaled shakily, tears spilling down her cheeks. The danger had passed for now, but the unease lingered, unresolved. Hours stretched into night. The veterinary team worked with painstaking care, administering treatments, monitoring Peanut's vital signs, and providing Lily with small updates. Each flicker of the little dog's paw, each tentative wag of his tail, sent waves of relief and fear through her. She whispered incessantly, her voice raw from worry, offering love and courage in every word. Rhino stayed by her side, offering silent support, scanning every corner of the clinic as though the world itself were still a threat. Meanwhile, social media continued to buzz with updates. Clips of the original confrontation, the courage of a little girl, and the viral outrage over Chase's cruelty spread rapidly. People across the city debated, sympathized, and speculated. Support for Lily and Peanut surged, accompanied by fierce condemnation of Chase and his father. Comments ranged from praise for bravery to outrage at cruelty, and some called for legal action. The story had transcended the local carnival, becoming a viral testament to courage, consequence, and the power of standing up to injustice. Lily's heart ached with exhaustion. Hours of fear, worry, and anticipation had left her trembling and drained. She pressed her forehead to Peanut's carrier once more, whispering softly, "Stay with me, I'm right here, don't give up." Peanut's paw twitched faintly again, fragile but persistent. It was enough to keep her anchored, enough to give her a fragile thread of hope in the storm of anxiety. Rhino's presence, steady and unwavering, was a constant reminder that she was not alone, that courage could take many forms, and that protection could appear in unexpected shapes. And then, as the night deepened, a new sound cut through the tension, the soft beep of a phone alert signaling a video upload. Lily's mother glanced at the screen, eyes widening. The footage showed the intruder leaving the clinic, but something in the clip suggested that this encounter was far from over. Chase's voice appeared in the background, taunting and fearful, and the social media post began to draw attention from local authorities. The implication was clear. Peanut's ordeal and Lily's courage were about to collide with the law, public opinion, and the consequences that Chase and his father had so far evaded. Lily pressed her hands together again, whispering softly, "Please, let him be safe, please." Peanut stirred faintly, eyes fluttering open, and the fragile sign of life, however small, felt monumental. Rhino's hand rested on her shoulder, reassuring, grounding, ready for whatever came next. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the fragile drama that had unfolded in the quiet, sterile room of the clinic. Inside, life, courage, and consequence hung in precarious balance. And just as the weight of hope and fear settled over them, the clinic door clicked softly, another presence approaching, deliberate and unannounced. The room froze. Lily's heart skipped a beat. Who or what would arrive now in the dead of night to further disrupt the fragile sanctuary that held her little dog alive? Every eye in the room turned toward the door, tension coiling like a predator. The fragile thread of relief and hope was about to be tested once more. The clinic door creaked open, slow and deliberate, and every heartbeat in the room seemed to freeze. Lily pressed her hands to Peanut's carrier, instinctively shielding him as her small frame trembled with tension. Rhino moved slightly in front of her, his body a wall of calm authority, eyes scanning the newcomer with razor-sharp focus. The fluorescent lights reflected off the figure entering, a uniformed police officer, badge glinting, not a threat but a herald of accountability. Relief surged through Lily, but it was tangled with exhaustion, worry, and the adrenaline that had kept her alert for hours. "Evening," the officer said, voice steady, carrying both authority and reassurance. "We received reports about the incident at the carnival. I need to speak with everyone involved and ensure the dog's safety." Rhino's gaze never left the officer, and Lily felt a quiet surge of hope. This was what justice looked like: order, protection, and verification that the cruelty and recklessness of others could no longer go unchecked. The weight of uncertainty began to lift, replaced by cautious anticipation. Lily's parents stood close, flanking her protectively. "He's stable," her mother said, voice still tight with lingering worry. "The vet says he's fighting, but we're still waiting for full recovery." The officer nodded, taking notes carefully. "We'll ensure he receives any additional care needed," the officer said, "and we'll begin an investigation regarding the behavior at the carnival, including assault on the child and animal cruelty." Lily's heart thumped wildly. Words she had barely dared to imagine, justice, accountability, were finally entering her world. Rhino stepped back slightly, but his presence remained a protective anchor. "She's been through a lot," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "But she stood up when no one else would. That courage deserves recognition." The officer glanced at him, respect in their eyes, acknowledging that courage could manifest in unexpected forms. Lily pressed her face to Peanut's carrier again, whispering softly, "You're okay, you're safe now." Peanut's small paw twitched, and Lily allowed herself a tearful smile. Survival, fragile and tentative, had returned. Meanwhile, Chase and Derek Maxwell were at a different kind of reckoning. A police car had arrived at their home, officers requesting statements regarding the carnival incident. Chase's friends had abandoned him long ago, fearful of association with cruelty now under public scrutiny. Chase's face was pale, fear gnawing through his usual arrogance. Maxwell's tailored suit had lost its power in the harsh fluorescent light of reality. "We can't spin this," Maxwell muttered under his breath. "The evidence is clear. We have to cooperate or it will get worse." Back in the clinic, Lily and Rhino were invited to give statements. The nurse who had been her anchor smiled gently. "You're brave," she said. "Not many children would do what you did." Lily pressed a small hand to Peanut's head, feeling the faint, fragile warmth of life against her palm. "I just wanted him to be safe," she whispered. The nurse nodded. "That's the most important kind of bravery." Rhino's massive frame stayed close, but he allowed Lily's voice to carry courage in her own way, unshielded and yet completely protected. Hours passed as officers conducted interviews, taking statements, reviewing video evidence and preparing reports. The viral footage of Chase's cruelty, coupled with eyewitness accounts, was irrefutable. Maxwell's attempts to manipulate the narrative were crumbling. Public outrage, social media scrutiny, and official intervention created a force that even his wealth and influence could not deflect. Chase's sense of invincibility had evaporated completely, replaced by fear and helplessness. He had learned, painfully and publicly, that actions had consequences. Lily, exhausted but resolute, continued to sit beside Peanut. Every small movement of his paw, every flicker of his eyelids was a victory, a testament to resilience. The veterinarian provided updates. Peanut had stabilized overnight, though his recovery would require weeks of care. Lily's hands shook, but her heart soared. Hope, fragile and tentative, had returned in full force. Rhino stayed near, scanning the clinic but allowing Lily to take the center of this moment. Courage had been a team effort, but the girl had been the spark that ignited it. Outside the clinic, news crews had begun to arrive, alerted by social media and the viral nature of the confrontation. By the morning, Lily's story had spread across the city. A little girl had faced cruelty, protected an innocent animal, and inspired a stranger to act when no one else would. Messages of support, donations for Peanut's care, and admiration for Lily flooded social media. Chase's reputation was in tatters. Maxwell faced a moral and legal reckoning that could not be avoided. The world had taken notice. Lily's father knelt beside her, whispering softly, "You did something amazing, sweetie. You stood up when it mattered." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were a mixture of relief, pride, and lingering adrenaline. She pressed her forehead to Peanut's soft fur. "I couldn't have done it without him," she whispered. Rhino's hand rested on her shoulder, steady, unwavering. Courage had many forms, her own, Peanut's, and Rhino's, but together they had faced cruelty and survived. Chase and his father, meanwhile, were escorted by officers to file more detailed statements. Chase's arrogance was gone, replaced by a fear that made his earlier cruelty seem absurd and small. Maxwell's carefully constructed world of power and influence was cracking, leaving him to face the consequences he had long shielded himself and his son from. Outside the carnival grounds, the whispers of justice spread. Words like accountability, morality, and consequence became louder than wealth or privilege. By late afternoon, Peanut was moved to a recovery area where Lily could sit beside him under supervision. He was small, fragile, and still trembling, but he wagged his tail faintly when he saw her. Lily laughed softly, tears streaming, relief overwhelming exhaustion. "You're a fighter," she whispered, pressing her cheek to his fur. Peanut nuzzled her hand weakly but with unmistakable recognition. Rhino stood quietly nearby, scanning the recovery room. Even now, the world outside could be unpredictable, but inside this room, courage, love, and justice had created a sanctuary. Later, as Lily left the clinic with her parents, the city seemed transformed. Bystanders who had watched the unfolding events, some in person, some on social media, offered smiles, words of encouragement, and admiration. Lily felt a mixture of embarrassment and pride. The world had seen her courage. The world had witnessed the cruelty she had faced, and the world had responded in support of what was right. Rhino followed quietly, a steadfast reminder that courage could be both silent and commanding. Chase and Maxwell would face legal proceedings, social repercussions, and a city unwilling to forget. The viral videos, eyewitness accounts, and the moral weight of their actions ensured that consequences would be long-lasting. Lily, meanwhile, had learned something profound. Even the smallest voice, the tiniest act of courage, could ripple outward to change the world. And sometimes help came from unexpected places: a stranger on a motorcycle, a volunteer, a community willing to witness the truth. As evening settled over the city, Lily sat beside Peanut, watching his fragile body stir with strength. The trauma was not erased. The road to recovery was long, but life, tenacious, stubborn, and precious, had prevailed. Rhino, standing guard nearby, nodded subtly, his presence a promise that courage and protection had not abandoned her. Lily whispered once more, voice soft but firm, "We made it and we'll keep making it together." Peanut's paw twitched, faint but alive, a tiny heartbeat of triumph. The story, which had begun with cruelty, fear, and helplessness, ended with courage, compassion, and consequence. The little girl had faced injustice, the biker had acted decisively, and a fragile life had been saved. Justice, fragile and imperfect, had arrived. And even as the city lights flickered outside, Lily knew that this was only the beginning of her understanding of courage, the kind that survives fear, inspires others, and endures even in the darkest moments. For the first time in hours, Lily allowed herself to breathe fully. Peanut was safe. Justice was moving forward, and she had stood tall, unbroken, proving that even the smallest among us could ignite a force larger than cruelty, larger than fear, and larger than injustice. The night was long, the city restless, but inside that quiet recovery room, hope, courage, and life had triumphed.